At dawn and fog that envelops the valley of Kadesh, the sky and the earth slink in a limit of haze, where pillars of obsidian engraved by runes celestial rise among ancient forests and limestone hills. There they coexist in reverent intention, the winged hosts, seraphim of incandescent wings, cherubs of leonine leather, and the children of the earth, marked by the forbidden gifts that the Watchers bequeathed in remote ages. Nephilim of titanic stature wander among villages and ruins, bearing the ambiguous legacy of arcane knowledge and of the wrathful force, while human prophets, fearful and fervent, seek in the interpretation of the stars and in the balm sacred the breath for redemption or the omen of an inexorable fall. In the heart of this intertwining of light and shadow rose Enoch, the sublime herald of the Ineffable. They say that in the past he ascended to the 7 celestial thrones and contemplated the deepest secrets of the throne eternal, returned wrapped in stellar brilliance, armed with living scrolls, where the angelic voices and the vows divine were immortalized. Its lofty bearing echoes the majesty of the cosmos. Every step of yours tears the veil between the profane and the divine. Each word is a seed of judgment and of grace. It is Enoch who entrusts himself to the prayers of the afflicted, to him that repentant angels seek comfort, and by your pen infused with light stellar, the legacy of a world about to choose between the splendor of union and the abyss of pride. The night sky trembled when for the first time whisper of revolt traversed the celestial arches. It was not the ordinary murmur of the stars, but the echo of deep and forbidden desire. Shemyaza, arching over the veil of ethereal sky, was the first to recognize it, the inexorable longing of the flesh, the longing to know the touch, earthy, the fleeting heat of mortal wombs. The vastness of the cosmos, before full of crystalline harmony, suddenly seemed tight, as if a crack of doubt had torn the immaculate perfection. On a moonless night, 200 watchmen of pearlescent feathers gathered under the great glass dome, where reflected millennia of divine singing. Each wing, normally raised in serene postures, trembled with restlessness. Under the arch of celestial light, Gabriel raised his voice to remind the commandment eternal. You will never break the veil between the immortal and the mortal. That which has been forbidden to us does not belong to us. But before fear silenced the discussion, Armaros rose and confided in a grave tone, there is emptiness in our essence, one gap that only earthly experience can fill. As beings of light, we can guard the world, but we will never understand its pulse if we do not dare to touch it. The debate ignited like fire on dry straw. Miraculous, with dark eyes, warned about the price of transgression, remembering the account of the angels who dared teach arcane secrets and brought plagues. Some remembered of the terror of the primitive fall, others of the monotony of contemplative ages that robbed them of the freshness of mystery. Then Shemyaza raised the silver scepter, gift from Hebe at the threshold of the throne, and in a voice laden of melancholy and fascination asked, Brothers, contemplate the earth, valleys in dew drinks, enteric villages in corners of pain and laughter, mothers rocking children in cycles of love and fears ancestral. There it pulses what has been forbidden to us, the slow rhythm of the human heart, the flame living of desire, the vulnerability of the flesh. You will be faithful to the divine decree, or will you dare to touch the mystery that surrounds us in silence? Let us be solitary guardians, or let us walk as mentors among mortals. The moment your words echoed, the hall of clouds silenced. Gabriel, sorrowful, remembered the fear of the Most High. But Azazel, with the incandescent gaze, leaned about Shemyaza and whispered, If compassion granted us the gift of wisdom, we shouldn't offer it the one who lies in the darkness of the unknown. The Watchers raised their fist, sealing the pact. When the last vote was cast, the clouds parted in curtains of light silver. Portal opened between the spheres, and in communion of wings and hunger for discoveries, the 200 angels bent down for the voluntary fall. That exact instant, the firmament groaned in silence and the earth waited without knowing, the breath of an irreversible change. When the last traces of celestial light disappeared in the firmament, the 200 watchers emerged in a valley bathed by twilight. The grass shimmered under the warm gold of sunset, and to the far rose the huts of the village of Kadesh, surrounded by windmills and crops modest. Silence tense hung in the air. The mortals, guessing the presence of something beyond the ordinary, they served torches and improvised weapons, as if they feared shadow attack. Shemyaza, raising the voice with the authority of a king ancestral, approached the row of peasants. Their feet did not sink into the ground, but floated a hand's breadth from the ground, and his translucent garments seemed like magnets that attracted everyone's gaze. "Children of the earth," he announced. "We didn't bring chains, but the breath of knowledge. We came to teach, not to subjugate." Murmur ran through the human ranks. Time of fear, time of fascination. The watchers divided into groups of 4 to present their gifts. Azazel, with hands wrapped in flames white, lit one furnace improvised on smooth stones. The metal shone in pale blue embers, and he shaped one blade light as a petal, but capable of tearing the leather with precision. When lifting, said, "Here lies the secret of iron." No more raw hammer, but fusion of art and patience. Some blacksmiths from the village approached, trembling, touching the newly forged metal and feeling the heat that pulsed, as if Ali lived heart alive. Meanwhile, Cocobello spread over one rustic table glass jars, containing eyes and ointments of shades indecent. Curious peasants experimented one drop on the back of the hand, and the relief against fevers and chills was instantaneous. "I harvested roots from the depths of the mountain of Seramoth," he explained. "Here the healing power appears without fanfare, but with effectiveness." The antiseptic women glanced at each other in a glimmer of hope. Finally, Barakiel unfolded the astrolabe of silver and crystal, capable of mapping the course of the stars with such accuracy that even the nearby weather could be predicted. By turning the concentric rings olive oil and flower producers foresaw the future of the harvests and of seasons. "Look to the sky," the angel invited you, "and you will see that each star traces the destiny of the fields. There is harmony where there was before there was uncertainty." Between each demonstration, Shemyaza sought words of comfort and inspiration, guided the trembling hands of the elderly, explaining the hidden order that united heaven and earth. Her voice, deep as the roar of the seas, weaving the feeling that a new pact between the worlds. As night falls, the humans, exhausted with fear, but intoxicated by the promise of progress, invited the guards to stay in one of the larger cabins. Around one fireplace, they shared whole grain bread and freshly harvested honey, while the torches projected shadow dances on the clay walls. Between sips of date wine, listened to accounts of the cosmos. Tales of comets that cut through the firmament, of fire orbs that were born in distant nebulas distant. The mortals, intoxicated with information, smiled with the discovery that the universe was even vaster than they had assumed. But in the stillness of the night, some peasants whispered among themselves, "Is this light a blessing or a harbinger of ruin?" Ruin. The torches trembled as if they were responding. The truth resides in the hands that imposed it. And while the stars witnessed the unprecedented meeting, the seed of what alliance, sweet and dangerous, began to germinate in the soil of Kadesh. When the sun rose over the valley, already there were not more them and us, but one only voice emerging from the enormous village by the Euphrates. The mud huts, interspersed to translucent tents, formed mosaic of earthy and silvery colors, illuminated by torches that burned with scented resin taught by the watchers. In the center, a large stone courtyard served as agora. Ali was raising the first joint altar, one smooth slab where humans traced rustic inscriptions and angels engraved celestial sigils. Every dawn began with hybridized chant, weaving in unison the mortal pulse and the ethereal tone of their voices. Right after the corner, each distributed to their tasks. By orders of Azazel, small forges were lit in a circle, so that the noise of hammer on the cast iron mixed with the croaking of the frogs in the swamp. Humans learned to light the brazier with splashes of celestial essence, and the watchers discovered the delicacy of adjusting the soot to obtain various types of steel. Next to the teaching of Cocobel, improvised gardeners rotated the crops according to the phase of the moon, preparing furrows that retained the moisture and attracted worms. Knowing that transformed the arid soil into land fertile. On the third day, public classes emerged. Armaros recited treatises about astrology, pointing to the zenith and drawing in Podemica, constellations forgotten. The human children recorded symbols on the ground with willow branches, while young elders were asking crazy questions, trying to anticipate eclipses and floods. In first adjacent tent, Barakiel guided the young in the carving of runes of protection, teaching that true power did not come from fear, but from the understanding of invisible forces. The shared dishes at meals were living examples of cultural fusion. whole wheat breads with celestial chia seeds, stews of roots and spices smoking, honey and wine mixed with angelic spices that granted lightness to the spirit. Around the large clay bowl, elderly humans recounted tales of their ancestors, and the watchers added episodes of stellar battles, of angels who raised mountains and waved storms. There was born the feeling of a common story, even though with each sentence hung the warning silent, not to exceed certain sacred limits. As the moons passed, however, nuances of disharmony began to emerge. Some humans too dedicated to the teachings heavenly gave up intuitive practices, how to plant when the wind was blowing favorable without waiting astrological advice. They felt wandering without an angel by my side. On the other side, some watchmen, intoxicated by the bodily freedom, spent long hours in deadly games of hunting and laughter, forgetting to fulfill the vigilance against predators and floods. Still, the community celebrated the harvests with rituals of flame and singing, renewing your pact every week. There was a feeling of utopia, the conviction that united, mortals and immortals could build a terrestrial paradise. But in the innermost part of each heart, shadow and light intertwined as it was and thorn, and it was from this fertile soil of contradictions that would give rise to forbidden passions and the drama, the Nephilims. Under the mantle of a fantasia of first moon silver, when the song of the crickets mingled to the rustling of the leaves, the barriers between the celestial and the earthly began to unravel. Us surroundings of Kadesh, by the bank of a river with clear waters, furtive meetings arose between watchers and mortals, moments filled with contained desire, of touches that burned like embers. Shemyaza, whose heart throbbed with a piercing longing, found in Myrrh one of his most ardent confidences. She, with moist eyes and soft skin, felt on the tips of the fingers the intoxicating shiver of white feathers brushing against the flesh. In the following nights, by the riverbanks, they became stage of delicate rituals, lily petals arranged in mandalas on the water. Incense of myrrh and frankincense lit in holders of bronze, chants murmured in an ancient language which sounded like the vibration of stars. Each touch was celebrated as an offering. The angels intertwined fingers with peasant women, blowing warm prayers against the male skin, discovered the ecstasy in intertwining of veins and sorrows. Sneaky laughter echoed among the reeds, and the very wind seemed to conspire, carrying the sighs like notes suspended in the air. The passions, however, were forbidden by the decree that Gabriel had emphasized, but the longing did not know laws. Wardrobes intertwined with the schedule, the weaver of wool cloaks, while Barakiel discovered in the fingers of Tariq, the young shepherd, the warmth of the flesh, seduced the feeling of mutual vulnerability. Mortals and immortals shared the exile of their own natures, though the watchers experienced finitude and the humans for the first time tasted eternity in each sigh. In a few moons, the pregnancies were revealed to be painful. Bellies ignited like full moons, and all the owls in the region fell silent, sensing the extraordinary. The women moaned in profane pains, assisted by angels, whose compassion oscillated between delight and remorse. Mira was the first to have visions of dancing constellations in her dreams, feeling the fetus turn in chains of light interior. Gader experienced tremors that shook her bones as if it were to absorb the strength of comet. The gestation of the demigods ran in supernatural rhythm. In 30 nights, the mothers were afflicted by visions of landscapes heavenly, crystal valleys, mercury rivers, star gardens. Their bodies radiated heat, and their eyes sparkled like beacons in the midst of darkness. The angels, out of fear and fascination, painted symbols of protection on the swollen bellies, carved runes of silence on the walls of the tents, sang hymns of assurance for safe childbirth. But Gabriel, in dreams sent by messengers from above, warned that this union would bring rupture, sowing ruins where only hope flourished. On a dawn of crackling thunderstorms, the climax has arrived. Lightning cut through the sky, while thunder announced the first cries, crying that made the world tremble. The huts trembled as if they were alive, and the population woke up frightened by the echo of voices that no longer belonged to the plain human. When the rain dissipated fierce, 4 titanic bodies emerged from the mud, the first Nephilim. They were tall like young cedars, with muscles sculpted in shadows and light. Your eyes, 2 incandescent orbs, reflected the brilliance of the stars that their parents angelic contemplated. The hands, long and strong, opened the soil in a gesture curious, probing the earth like one who seeks the ancient memory. The collective cry resonated like drums ancestral, making the sheep retreat, shaking the houses and silence the fountains. The villagers, still trembling, raised alternating prayers of fear and adoration. Some fled in panic, others offered cloaks and weapons, convinced that those giants were heralds of prosperity. But there was in the gaze of the Nephilims one raw innocence, mix of vulnerability and unrestrained power, that foretold that the balance between heaven and earth was about to shatter. And it was in that moment of ecstasy and horror that ended the birth of the demigods. Encounters of forbidden passion had given rise to creatures that carried in the body irreconcilable tension between ethereal light and the weight of mortal flesh, announcing unfolding of one era of disasters and disharmonies that no celestial chant could contain no more. When the first dawns appeared after the birth of the Nephilims, no one recognized the valley where once reigned the hybrid harmony. The soil, fractured by the steps of the demigods, exhaled sulfur vapor, as crops once fertile by the lunar lessons transformed in swamps of black mud where the crickets silenced in agony. Each gesture of the giants awakened tremors and cracks that consumed adobe walls and wooden bridges. Wood. In peak of chaos, the Nephilims marched to gather fruits and cattle, but their feet crushed springs and pens. Freshwater rivers overflowed in floods of mud, burying trails and entire villages. Irrigation wells, excavated by mortals and angels, collapsed under the underground pressure, leaving dry fields instead of golden ears. The scent of the heavenly spices withered, and the air stagnated in clouds of thirsty insects. The blacksmiths, who once celebrated the union of art and science, saw their forges transform into war machines. Forged blades with ethereal steel, able to break bones as if they were branches dry, came to be wielded by peasants frightened. Swords with angelic runes were wielded to plunder rival grain deposits, and axes made with condensed light knocked down olive groves in search of wood for barricades. The cooperation pact weakened, giving way to the law of the strongest, and the strongest was almost always the Nephilim that approached. Meanwhile, the healing potions that cured fevers were adulterated. I ingested of excessive doses to subjugate opponents, were igniting pulmonary fevers and convulsions. The celestial herbs that bloomed only under a certain lunar deacon were ruthlessly harvested excessively, exhausting magical reserves and leaving the soil barren. Concentrates of poison, disguised as elixirs, flowed through the springs and intoxicated herds and villages neighboring. In the dark corners of the improvised tents, angels who tried to mediate disputes became orphans of authority. Cabinets before master in protection runes discovered that those same symbols had been inscribed on the doors of the enemies as a threat of retaliation. Kokabel, that will study the lunar phases to guide the sowers, witnessed young humans ignoring their teachings and planting in full eclipse, attracting earrings of grasshoppers that devoured the little that remained. In the distance, the fury of the heavens thundered. Clouds dense were collapsing in hailstorms, which decimated gardens and unroofed huts. Lightning cut through the night like burning spears, setting barns on fire and breaking chains of mountains. Then he remembered Barakiel's warning: when divine knowledge diverts, gives humility, calls for ruin. But the regret came late, suffocated by the cries of the desperate. With the valley in convulsion, the same Nephilims who faced the world with childlike curiosity came to be conceived as monsters. Some villagers, terrified, forged iron chains and tried to capture the demigods, wounding what provoked retaliations of primal fury. The celestial defenses of the angels proved insufficient. The arrows of light struck against shields of resistant skin, and the protective walls were disintegrating when incinerated by the thunder. At the peak of the conflict, the silence that day reigned between heaven and earth was broken by a unanimous cry of lamentation. Shemyaza, on her knees over the rustic slab of the large courtyard, watched helplessly the melting of the celestial slabs in the rivers of mud. The watchmen, with tears of light, remembered the vow of compassion that had brought them to there, but they understood finally that they had sown dissonance where they sought love shared. The last torches burned in rags of smoke. Villagers fled in panic along the bumpy trails. The Nephilims, hungry and disturbed, set out in search of new lands, carrying with them the echo of their titanic voices, and the angels, rising in the dawn, but without shine in their feathers, they saw the valley collapse behind them. There, in the devastated plain, the tragedy concluded. The encounter between the divine and the human, driven by the noblest intentions, triggered irreversible collapse. The sky, which before inclined in mercy, withdrew in silence while the earth groaned under the weight of the steps that should never have been taken. In the highest sphere of the cosmos, beyond the serene song of the coruscating stellar galleries, was situated the eternal throne bed of pure light where the Father, majesty unquestionable, presided the council of elders heavenly. There was no time or veil. Each thought germinated in clarity absolute. Each gesture reverberated in synagogues of colors lively. But in a dawn without auroras, the silence was torn by subtle alarm. The rumor of one dissonance emerged from the murmur of worlds inferior. The first to notice was Metatron, the scribe of the divine writings whose voice moved like a whip of crystal. "My father," announced, "from the depths of the earth sphere comes way of corruption." The laws that govern the link between the immortal and the mortal were broken. Watchers descended, joined with mortals, and created beings that walk on the border between light and shadow. The words sounded like contained thunder, and for a moment the throne wavered in its glory. Next, Sadok, the elder of the pristine songs, extended a shining thread of light and revealed on the ethereal surfaces projected before them mosaic of images. Bare valleys of smoke putrid, buildings buried by mud black, giants with flaming gazes standing over burning villages. Each scene pulsed in echoes of lament and fear, as if the very fabric of creation was being torn. The Father then raised his hands, whose palms emitted dazzling brightness. "Becomes imperative, restore the balance," decreed in a voice that shook constellations entire. "I will not allow the essence of the pact sacred be reduced to ashes." Those who fell, angels of light who should guide, must be confronted and the order re-implanted. But not for mere steel and revenge. It is necessary compassion that redeems and justice that corrects. Choir of seraphim prostrated, singing in unison, hymns of contained joy, reaffirming the hatred for the abandonment of angelic duty. Then the council was divided into 3 chambers of deliberation. In the chamber of the vote, Cassiel proposed that the fallen be deprived of their feathers and relegated to the margins of time. In the chamber of mercy, Jeremiel advocated offering them one last chance of repentance under the spell of restoration missionaries. Finally, in the execution chamber, Zarachiel called for the pure and simple eradication to cut the root of transgression. While the voices intertwined in celestial frictions, the Father contemplated each facet of the debate in silence only matched to the vastness of infinity. Then raised his right hand and said, "Mercy and justice will walk together. I will send 2 of my bravest archangels, Michael, warrior of steel and clarity, that will wield the sword of light to protect the faithful, Raphael, bearer of the cure, to close the wounds that were opened. They will be messengers of redemption and judgment. Those who will repent will open doors. To those who persist only will remain the exile." In a flow of muscles and wings, Miguel appeared wrapped in halos of sparks in a triumphant entrance, and Raphael arose brought by currents, soft fragrance healing. The throne trembled slightly when the Father conferred upon them the insignias, the flaming sword, the balm crystalline, the uncontestable orders. "Go," concluded, "and that your step be serious as thunder and sweet as a sigh of relief. That harmony may kiss the earth again, before that the last judgment falls upon all its inhabitants." Upon pronouncing these words, the greater voice echoed through all the spheres, sealing the summons. The angels in unison bowed before the supreme decree, and in the depths of cosmos, the stellar galleries vibrated in expectation, for it was time to expose the wounds of creation and to decide if the divine remedy would be salvation or catastrophe. At the breaking of the terrestrial dawn, the horizon vibrated with streaks of shimmering light. In the first moments of awakening, 3 divine energy beams tore the clouds loaded, tracing a bow of brilliance that eclipsed the very rising sun. Miguel, wielding the sword of light forged in the forge of the Word, descended in a straight flight, its wings raising winds of sparks. By his side, Raphael hovered serene, his cloak flowing in strokes of emerald tone and amber, carrying on the left arm the crystalline balm that contained the power of remission. One aura of authority and compassion radiated from both, as if each down feather of its wings kept the seal of mercy and vigor. The valley of Kadesh, still smoldering from the recent disasters, fell silent before the divine ostentation. The ruins of the huts, the runes burned on the stones, and the footprints deep of the Nephilims formed a scene of destruction and anguish. Miguel landed first, and the ground trembled, as if it settled your step firm. The rustling of the wings sounded like trumpets of summons. Raphael touched the earth next, and where the heavenly balm awoke over the soil, the burnt herbs recovered greenish tone, and tiny drops of dew cried out as a breath of life. 2 debris emerged, the remaining watchers, fallen figures with damaged feathers and glances that flirted between guilt and fear. Shemyaza, still stripped of all the majesty of yore, kneeling house, feeling the cold steel of judgment pierce your chest. Other dozens of angels, marked by the forbidden choices forbidden, raised their heads restless. Your voices fell silent upon realizing that it was about assistance friendly, but of bearing voices of divine decree. Michael raised the sword solemnly. Children who chose the path of shadows, he proclaimed, the Creator sent me to separate the wheat from the chaff. Your alliance with the flesh has brought ruin. Who to wish to repair the disorder may bend under the weight of atonement. Whoever insists on darkness will know the steel of my blade. His tone did not allow for contestation. Each word reverberated in the cliffs distant and stirred the clouds like massive bells. Raphael took a few steps, depositing the balm on the cracked ground. I am the hand that soothes the wounds, said Enoch calm. Where there is sincere regret, I will mine a path of reconciliation. But the balm will not save those who refuse the light. Come then, rise up in humility, or share the destiny of the exiled. His gaze swept over the assembly of the fallen, stopping at cabinets and Quakabeu, whose eyes swore to weigh, and in Azazel, whose expression closed in defiance. Shemyaza, trembling but proud, raised his voice. Miguel, messenger of judgment. Raphael, bearer of the cure. Our steps brought knowledge to the world, but admit the price that was imposed. With whomever your decree weighs less, we plead forgiveness. And at the moment he pronounced the request, some feathers fell to the ground, extinguishing into silver dust that dissolved in the breeze. Raphael, bending the body, touched the powder with the balm, and one luminescence soft rose to the atmosphere as I tried involving acceptance. However, not everyone shared that regret. Azazel, with the ethereal steel armor that still covered part of his arms, struck his fist in the chest and shouted, "The earth does not need of mercy, but of strength." It was through the forbidden union that the giants emerged giants. Great is the power of this act, and I will not renounce it. Silence of hatred cut the air. Miguel advanced, the blade creating a luminous arc. Then you will be separated, warned, for your stubbornness casts more shadows. I see the faint ember of the sword approaching. Azazel withdrew, breaking the siege towards the abysses, where there were still faithful. As the sun fully rose, Miguel and Raphael gathered the group of angels willing to restore order. Those who had knelt formed silent procession, led by the archangels toward the edges of the valley. Raphael recited prayers of purification, washing each angelic wound with his immaterial hands, while Miguel drew in the air circular protection insignias, destined for the success of the subsequent mission. Claim the land from the ashes of rebellion, and restore the original covenant between Creator, angels, and humans. And so in the breath set of sword and balm, it began to the great shifting of forces. Movement that sought light and compassion, but that shadow and challenges had already promised to transform into a succession of tests that would exceed everything that creation has ever known. Michael and Raphael led the group of repentant angels to the ancient communal altar, now circle of cracked stones and extinguished embers. Around, the few fallen who had refused the reconciliation offer. Azazel, proud in his ethereal armor. Barakiel, whose blade of light darkened in acts of violence. And several vigilantes that still embraced brute force, instead the humiliation of the request for forgiveness. Miguel advanced with a firm step, the sword flaming held at chest height. From the center of the circle, Azazel raised a twisted smile. You come with promises of healing and forgiveness, O warrior archangel, but how many humans have fallen by your blade? How many famine comes to those who today implore you for grace? The voice of Azazel thundered like a whip. Do not judge with pity the act that well feeds this world. The crowd of the remorseful gathered in silence, while Raphael, raising the crystalline balm, approached Barachiel. The power without compassion is a wound that opens whenever life calls. Life calls. Let me caress your wings, Barachiel, and free your heart of the weight of pride. But the angel with a closed expression drew back his cloak. I did not come here to receive mercy that you call balsam. I came to defend our choice or die with it. Miguel took a deep breath. Then so be it. The sword does not rise against those who repented, but protects the humiliated. Be judged. If you resist, the steel will restore the threshold between heaven and earth. In a gentle gesture, he turned his wrist, and from the blade sprang sparks that illuminated the entire valley. Azazel raised the banner of his armored arm of ethereal iron, and a roar broke out when Barachiel drew his darkened light blade. The friction of the blades echoed like thunder. The repentant angels withdrew to make room for the spiritual duel that was unfolding. Miguel advanced with precision. The sword scratched the air, tracing flaming runes on the ground. Azazel dodged with demonic agility, hitting the ground to open fissures that released flames of ash. The earth trembled, living memory of the step of the Nephilims. For a moment, Miguel's gaze faltered in pain, recalling the cruelty that such power could inflict. Raphael raised the balm, blowing a perfumed breeze that dissipated the grass's corruptions and brought dim light to the eyes of the spectators. Barachiel, fighting alongside Azazel, was the target of limiting blow. His blade bent, and he fell to his knees, the aura of bitterness wavering. "Repent," shouted Raphael. "The door of grace is open one last time." Time. Barachiel faced the Archangel of Healing, the face bathed in ethereal sweat, and the blade of rebellion fell from his hand. Tremor ran through your body. For a moment, your armor shimmered in silver, the spark of heart that could still contract in compassion. Azazel, seeing his surprised ally, clenched his fists. "No, we will be extinct for those who do not understand the value of the fall," he shouted, releasing one wave of darkness that pushed both the archangels back, making us hover in defiance. Michael, hovering in the air, activated the sword's fire. "Be exiled, exiled," decreed, and the blade touched the ground, not to kill, but to seal one spiritual prison. Silver light flow entangled Azazel, curving against the ground, their screams muffled by the echoes of a prison forged in the very essence of disobedience. Raphael, for his part, cleaned the balm in the earth where Barachiel lay. "Go in peace if you choose so," murmured. The confused angel felt his pride being dissolved like frost to the sun. At the end, he extended his hand and was lifted, redeemed, between tears of relief. The other fallen watchers, witnessing the defeat of their two leaders, debated in a cutting silence. Some knelt down asking for forgiveness, others dissolved into fleeting shadows through the surrounding abysses, destined to wander until the final judgment. When the confrontation ended, the altar was free of the beasts of rebellion. Miguel turned to Raphael and whispered, "The subdued anger is redemptive strength. The valley breathes again." Raphael touched the still hot blade, smiling with sad tenderness. "We are just at the beginning, brother. The wounds of the earth cry out for our healing, more than the placenta of late regret, late." Under the sky reddish of the evening, the two archangels rose up, ready for the next phase of the mission, to face not only fallen angels, but the very misery and hope of mortals and their demigods. The battle for restoration had just gained deeper contours, because now it was not just about punishing or forgive, but to guide creation whole back to the path of light. As evening fell, Enoch moved away from the village and climbed the rocky wall that dominated the valley of Kadesh. Man with a serene gaze and step contained, he sought, as he had done for years, loneliness to meditate on the meaning of the existence. This time, however, I felt a new weight in my chest, continuous buzzing, which sounded like the echo of distant trumpets. Even before reaching the top, one breeze abnormal shook the trees. It was a breath fragrant of frankincense and herbs sacred, as if the sky were pouring its essences for the first time in millennia. No summit, the twilight tinged the clouds with purple and gold. Enoch knelt on the cold slab and closed his eyes. Sudden flash tore his chest. It was Raphael, the Archangel of Healing, hovering over him, bringing in his hand parchment translucent, inscribed in characters of light. Without uttering a word, the Archangel laid the scroll at the feet of Enoch. and touched his forehead with finger wrapped in balm. In moment, the seer was transported to a parallel plane where time did not follow human course. It was the kingdom of prophecies. First vision, clouds loaded descending like living flames, transmuting in twisted shadows that engulfed cities and forests. The sky crackled in electric fury, raining star fragments. Enoch saw Nephilim standing on mountains of wreckage, the skin trembling under white rays, which climbed their shoulders and made them even more gigantic. Heard a chorus of colossal voices, our crying mercy, our shouting destruction, the final clash between mercy and revenge. Second vision, one great celestial scale, where the fortune of men and angels was weighed side by side. From the plate descended flames of regret, from another rose fleeting vapors of pride. The scale wavered, about to lean. Tanch understood that the cure, no matter how powerful, would not withstand the imbalance, and that the future would depend on an act of collective faith to counterbalance the chaos. Third vision, cloud steed, bringing 7 bronze trumpets. Each trumpet sounded a signal, the sprouting of herbs, poisonous plague waves, tides that advanced over plains, eruptions of fire in the belly of the earth. Enoch felt the breath of death and the bitter odor of the wilted flowers. However, at the same moment he heard a faint melody. It was the hymn of the redeemed, recorded in his innermost being as hope indestructible. Fourth vision, one shooting star of very rare plumage that crossed the firmament, touching the cup of the deluge and the chalice of redemption. Where it fell formed a spring of clear waters that healed the leprosy of the land and of spirit. From there, the just would sprout who would survive to the great separation, as they said the scroll of Raphael. Nephilim of pure heart, devoted humans and angels, who still preserved breath of humility, they would find refuge in that miraculous spring. When Enoch opened his eyes, the night was already displaying thousands of cold stars. Raphael remained in a state of benevolent vigil. The visions have been entrusted to you so that you may serve of the Herald, said the archangel. The judgment approaches like a wild horse. You must proclaim the signs, warn the people, and record each image. Only then will the world be ready to rise against the darkness. Before disappearing in a breath of breeze sweet, Raphael deposited in Enoch's hand luminescent wax seal containing the figure of the scale and the trumpet. And under the solemn rite of that meeting night, Enoch felt in his veins the omen, call inexorable to be a bridge between the heavens and the earth. In the following hours, still under the effect of the seeing balm, carved in 12 wooden plaques the prophecies, the symbols, and the warnings. Each character burned slowly in lines of silver light, as a living mark for those who dared deviate from the path of salvation. When the first galaxies twinkled in the distance, Enoch descended the cliff with the weight of one who carries more than their own life, carried in the words, the destiny of all the creation. At dawn, the scroll of Enoch had already circulated through the 4 corners of the valley. Messengers ran with copies of the plates, engraved in leather and molded in lightweight metal, for each village. The signs were printed on all of them, falling stars, trumpets resounding, wilted herbs and miraculous springs emerging. Some ignored the messages, treating them as superstition. Others, terrified, burned the signs in bonfires of fear. But it was enough for the first comet to cross the sky, for the terror to spread like gunpowder. In the fields, farmers crossed plows and sickles in offering, believing that the collective work could appease divine wrath. The clan leaders summoned assemblies by the campfires, letting repentant angels guided by Raphael read the prophecies aloud and instruct them rituals of purification with incense and sacred oil. Even the scattered Nephilims through the mountains received messengers that offered them alliance. Adhering to the pact of mercy would guarantee shelter in the new source that was emerging under the canto of the stellar deluge. Meanwhile, Miguel gathered the celestial battalions above the valley. In the firmament, hosts of cherubim and seraphim aligned in line, reducing dazzling light armors. Their trumpets echoed the call to surveillance, and each crack at the side stirred currents of wind capable of clouding the sun. The warrior archangel traced in the sky one insignia of fire, the symbol of the inverted scale, calling angels of all orders to the vanguard of the judgment. With the approach of the lunar equinox, the apex of the omens was marked. Locust clouds would arise in the south, would-be incendiary firebrands would fall over the north, and smoke avalanches would rise the dormant volcanoes. In the heart of the valley, Enoch raised a temporary sanctuary, where he lit ceremonial torches every 3 hours, reciting the visions in chants that trembled between fear and hope. People gathered in a circle, holding hands, praying in tongues ancient. There was solemn silence, interrupted only by the beating of angelic wings patrolling the sky. The last hours before the event final passed in palpable tension. The animals silenced. Even the rivers seemed to stop, impressed by the weight of silence. The Nephilims, gathered around the plates of Enoch, gazed the sky with flaming eyes, divided between the desire to destroy and the gentle flame of redemption which had arisen in the bosom of the visions. And it was on this threshold of expectation that Miguel, in front of the celestial legions, raised the luminous sword against the firmament. It has arrived the time to choose who will rise in supplication and who will end up in the dust of exile. Raphael, next to, struck the balm against one trumpet of bronze, making it vibrate like a deep bell. The sound broke the ancestral silence, and the whole world seemed to hold its breath. At the break of dawn, the great celestial atrium that opened over the valley of Kadesh trembled in a song of trumpets. Framed by pillars of obsidian and filigrees of starlight, ergoes the altar, sculpted in the very bed of the mountain. One slab smooth, embedded with runes, and adorned by the symbols engraved by Enoch. Ali, underloaded with violet clouds and torn by contained lightning contained, the representatives of all creation converged. In the east wing, hosts of seraphim and cherubim were lined up with wings open, their voices resonating in leonine harmony. Each pair of wings trembled like petals in the wind. It was the heavenly army ready to applaud mercy or wield the sword of judgment. To right gathered the watchers repentant, bronzous panes still hit by grey, feverish looks and intertwined hands in a gesture of supplication. Further on, they took refuge the Nephilims of divided soul, giants of unbronzed, that even when raised by ambition, now wavered the inherited strength and the desire for redemption. In the far west were the children of the earth, men, women, and children, lined up in simple cloaks, holding torches and wool banners. Tribal leaders raised carved staffs, priests murmured ancient prayers, and artisans carried replicas of the plates of Enoch, holding them as living treasures. Each face displayed the anguish of one who saw in judgment the risk of condemnation, and at the same time, the spark of hope. In the center in front of the altar, Miguel and Raphael hovered on a double throne. He, shining armor, flaming sword resting on the forearm. She, cloak emerald, crystalline balm shining on the hands. Among them, Enoch raised the sacred balance whose chains of light pulsed in the rhythm of the gathered hearts. In your calm face, one reads the weight of duty, to ally divine justice with compassion that only the human touch can manifest. Silence. The air exhaled ballast of expectation, as if the very cosmos held its breath. Then Miguel lowered the sword in a gesture with the past, and Raphael opened the wax seal luminous, letting the sound of metal resonate like a crystal bell. The chains of the balance jingled, echoing in all spheres. Enoch raised his voice clear and firm. O children of the high and the earth, it has come the moment to offer your fruit. Let each vindicate the regret or defend the innocence of your choices. Murmur traversed the atrium, while myriads of eyes turned to three emblematic groups. First, Shemyaza, head held high, simple but dignified attire, advanced to the slab. He bent down, wounded the ground with the staff, and spoke with a heavy voice. I, who brought knowledge to men, confess the weight of the fall, but I learned that wisdom without humility is poison. I implore for the chains of grace to endure the atonement. Collective sigh followed your order, and the scales chains leaned slightly to the plate of regret. Then Azazel, still wrapped, encourages the ethereal, rising in a leap that echoed the stones of the atrium. His gaze makes cow challenge. No, I do not deny my flames, for the fire purifies the world. If you would exile me, but do not expect me to kneel before the fear. The strength is the legacy I inherited, and for it, I fight. The plate of the scale wavered, hovering in a tense clash between light and darkness. Finally, Tubal-Cain, demigod of whips and protector of blacksmiths, laid his hand on the iron of his portable anvil. Her voice echoed like hammer blows. We are work and craft. Let's deny the value of labor and creation dissolves. I ask that the court recognize the nobility of the work, but accepts the weight of our desire. The scale wobbled for the third time, reflecting the complexity of human choices. The silence returned. Everyone was waiting for the verdict, the definitive sound that would decide if the plate of regret would accommodate, or if the blade of justice would cut definitively. Raphael cleaned a thread of balm on the edge of the altar, and Miguel caressed the blade with shine of promise. Enoch, raising both hands, let the scale find its final resting place. He bowed in greater honor to repentance, but took care to contain the plate that hung for the preservation of the work. At that moment, flash tore the clouds as if the throne eternal reinforced the decree. The assembly then bowed in worship, accepting the judgment that would also be made in the battlefield. For the justice would not end there, but would extend to the definitive confrontation between light and shadow, and under the echo of the trumpets heavenly, raised the final step to the climax of the conflict that would define the fate of creation. Right after the initial verdict of the balance, the celestial atrium became a stage of turmoil growing. Cutting wind advanced through the pillars of obsidian, raising stone dust and dead embers. Miguel, wielding the flaming sword, struck the shield with the blade, emitting a clear sound that activated the heavenly hosts. At the same time, Raphael blew the balm against the air and made a soft curtain of light, dark green, surrounded the repentant, protecting them from sudden attacks. The shadows created by the pillars emerged legions of fallen angels and Nephilims that had refused mercy. Twisted breastplates, foggy blades, and screams of demonism tore the silence. It was the final assault of the rebellion. Azazel, free from spiritual captivity, advanced to front, bearing his ethereal armor in flames. In the lower plane, the Nephilims roared, shaking axes and wielding spears, eager to avenge their dead and claim dominion over the earth. Miguel raised the sword high. Let there be justice and peace," he commanded. In a flash of light, cherubim descended in a spiral, each pair of wings beating like drums of war, creating currents of wind capable of disarming the giants to the ground. Seraphim took flight in serrated formation, descending in zigzag to release arrows of celestial fire that streaked the edge of the blades of the fallen. The battle broke out on multiple fronts, and the atrium echoed in a kaleidoscopic roar of steel and lightning. Raphael, moving between the corridors of conflict, extended the balm to anyone who dared to retreat from evil. Where I put my hands or spilled a few drops of the ointment, the wounds closed and the dark armors broke like dry clay. Darkness broke like dry clay. Archangels of lower rank raised shields of light around groups of villagers and demigods repentant, using the seal of the plates of Enoch to repel the blows. Even so, the heavy Nephilims in muscular arms broke formations and the spears became gigantic storms of pain. In the center of the arena, Azazel and Miguel clashed in a duel of colossal proportions. Each thrust of Miguel made the ground shake as if it were schism, and the waves of power cut through the ranks' enemies. Azazel against attacked with bursts of darkness that twisted the air, creating whirlwinds of gray and fire. When the chaotic armor of Azazel conferred upon him superiority for a moment, Miguel raised the shield and absorbed the blow, causing it to bounce in a blinding flash that flooded the atrium. While the duel of the archangels was destined to be the climax of the clash, Enoch, situated in a high position next to the altar, raised his voice. "O children of the earth and the sky, I asked repentance, and you were listeners of forgiveness. But see that the power you reject does not dwell only in the shackles of the past, but in the choice you make now." The words, loaded with prophetic authority, reverberated over the fighters, creating a pulse of energy that seemed to hold back blades in the air. The fog of battle yielded momentarily, and the Nephilims that fought with blind fury trembled in doubt. It was then that Raphael, in a solemn gesture, took the luminous wax seal, and it pressed against the chest of two of the greatest warriors fallen, opening in it portal of internal light. The Nephilims, feeling the regret pulsing in the heart, lowered the blade, fell to his knees, and the tears rolled down his huge face. From the opposite flank, Shemyaza and Gabriel, both redeemed, joined this act of mercy. Their voices rose in a song of supplication universal, crying out for the restoration of the original alliance. The celestial melody penetrated the fury of the fallen, bringing memories of their origin, the breath divine that would create you in goodness. Little by little, surrendered the weapon and gave up, allowing the heavenly hosts them mobilized as prisoners repentant. But not everyone gave up. Azazel, feeling betrayed by the grace that he would not submit to, released a roar of hatred and opened a portal of darkness on the slab of the atrium. From the abyss wavered black fire serpents and specters of shadows. Miguel, in a blazing movement, stuck the sword in the ground, raising a wall of pure flames, which sealed the portal in fury contained. With the blade still embedded, he summoned the power of the eternal throne, shooting a jet of silver light that consumed the dark creatures. In the aftermath of the explosion, the battlefield silenced. The chains of the scale, again intact, swayed in the lament of gentle wind. Sky and earth, united in fragility and greatness, contemplated the result. Fallen legions, now repentant, gathered with the repentant, and only Azazel and a few faithful followers isolated in a bubble of shadow, the battle of the spheres, reaching its climax, making way for the final judgment where the choices of each soul would seal the fate of all creation. In the silence that followed the battle of the spheres, the great atrium breathed as body exhausted. The fallen hosts, now under the mantle tenuousness of regret, aligned before the altar. The joyful repentance bowed in respect. The humans and Nephilims, trembling, were waiting for the final verdict. Enoch raised the sacred balance, whose chains reflected the twilight in silver sparks. By your side, Miguel and Raphael formed the triangle of judgment, guardians of the word and of grace. Enoch spoke in tone serious, echoing in the living stone walls. It has come the moment to reveal what burns in each heart. Each voice, each gesture, will determine the weight of sentence. Whoever believes in redemption, come closer. Whoever renounces, come closer too. Shadow will define your future. The groups moved with solemnity, forming 3 concentric circles, the innermost for the leaders, the next for the remorseful hosts, and the external for those who still hesitated. First, summoned before the scales, Shemyaza and Gabriel raised their joined hands. Shemyaza, with the body tired from the weight of guilt, spoke. Brought to men the fire of intellect, but I absorbed it in pride. Now I realize that true knowledge born of humility. He entrusted me to divine correction, willing to be a support stone for those come after me. Ray of light crossed the chains and caressed your expression, lighting up in a soft glow. Miraculous of silver armor and dampened gaze completed. I renounce the pride that corroded the wings, that my hands may be instruments of healing and my blades guardians of peace. The scale tilted firmly in favor of forgiveness, and both received the seal of redemption. Then Tubal-Cain advanced wearing the forge mantle. I was born among hammers and embers, and I swear that my art brings so much creation as much destruction. If my blade has wounded, let it now revive. If my fire consumed, may it shine. He struck the fiery breath against the metal of his anvil, forging one small bronze telescope. May this instrument remind me of the broad gaze that surpasses the desire for dominance. The scale hesitated, slightly leaning towards the supply plate, but Enoch raised his finger. May your future choices confirm your purpose. Entrusted to him replicas of tools divine, sign of conditional trust. Then Enoch called the Nephilim survivors, who fought like redeemed ones. Giants of renewed appearance raised their hands marked by strength. Some, born of arrogance, gave tears of regret. Others, hesitant, lowered the war hammers. Enoch allowed the balance to tilt in favor of salvation, but warned, your muscles should protect the fragile and not crush it. So be it remembered. The chains vibrated in a soft chord of acceptance. Finally, there remained the circle of hesitants and unfaithful. Among them, Azazel burst forth in contained fury. His eyes were lashing the internal scourge. You who applaud weakness, do not be deceived. Without fire there is no purification. I refuse to fall to my knees. Raphael raised the balm offering still at port in this empty armor curate. Azazel swept the air with the armlet and spat. My justice is different. The scale trembled, but leaning towards ruin. Enoch decreed, that your pride be your prison and your forge your destiny. Seal of shadow enclosed Azazel in a spiritual prison, surrounded by walls of living ash. At the moment when the trial reached its apex, each soul present understood the power of its choice. The revelations spread like contained fire. Leaders recognized the price of arrogance. Nephilim sensed the true value of strength. And the humans realized that only the delivery, mutual, grace, or the fall would shape the future. Miguel raised the sword not to strike, but to trace in the air arc silver, symbol of the Rite Alliance. Raphael spread the balm like rain gentle, uniting justice and mercy, and when the last seal was closed, the scale rested. The judgment echoed in every heart, making it clear that creation would be sustained not by the fear of the blade, but by the breath of conscious choices. In this moment of sacred silence, Enoch lowered his gaze to the valley and murmured, "In your hands is the destiny. Be written in it the verse of the light." When the last seal of shadow fell collapsed over the prison of Azazel, solemn silence swept the valley and the atrium heavenly, as hosts, before in arms, placed the irons on the ground, and the metallic echo sounded like a cry of hope. Miguel laid the flaming sword next to the altar, and Raphael, in a gesture of blessing, spread the balm over each face. A scale, now motionless, became symbol of restored peace. The first measure was to raise one clearing of reconciliation between the repentant legions and the peoples of the earth. Angels and Nephilims, still stained by the war, now carried white banners and together erected circle of crystal pillars, each coming from the mountains of Kadesh, from the depths of the lakes and the secret caves. In the center, the original slab of Enoch was cleaned of the burned runes and re-illustrated with sacred oil, becoming the heart of the new alliance. The leaders of the human tribes, reconciled with their former protectors, offered food, shelter, and joint work. Arquebuses were exchanged for plows, axes for carpenters' hammers, and the most beautiful weapons forged by the Nephilims passed to the guardianship of the elders as guarded symbols of what should never be repeated. Repeat. The fallen armies, freed now from the yoke of Azazel, they agreed to watch over the borders of the kingdoms to defend the defenseless instead of subjugating. Michael subscribed written treaties on bronze plates, pacts of non-aggression and cooperation that connected permanently sky, earth, and cliff of the Watchers. Each new document was signed with ceremonial blood, tiny drop, balsam, and the breath of cherubim, uniting promise and grace. Raphael sent messengers to all the corners of the world, replicating the prophecies of Enoch and instructing how to conduct the purification rites, frankincense fumigations, silver bells, and myrrh incenses to seal the eternal forgiveness. In the mountains, the redeemed Nephilims raised workshops and sawmills. Their hands, which once wielded thick spears, now wielded chisels and gouges, sculpting columns and temples. Of their furnaces no longer came weapons, but carvings of angels in stone and ornate chests with the figures of the scale and the trumpet. Trade fairs emerged on the edge of the woods, uniting artisans from all corners, mestizos of human and watchmen working side by side. At the level of the people, the rhythm of life resumed its rhythm. Farmers watered the land with rains brought by black clouds that have already dissipated, and the previously hard soil softened under the touch of the cooperative plow. The villages rebuilt dwellings and houses of worship in hybrid style, white stone towers adorned with colorful stained glass that shone the symbols of Enoch. In the warm breakfast in the sun, it was told with fervor as the stories of the righteous who had chosen the redemption. However, the destruction had left wounds, ditches, and craters marked ancient battlefields, and rubble of walls still pointed to the sky. Volunteer groups, humans, Nephilim, and even repentant fallen ones organized work groups to remove debris and replant forests. The waters of the springs before stagnant now flowed clear, fed by the chant of the remedies sung by priests and skins of lesser angels. Meanwhile, Azazel and his followers, uncompromising, remained enclosed, fed by one spark of lost power. Living reminder that pride does not healing without internal struggle. The few who insisted the path of pride would be confronted by the heavenly guard, unrelenting in the mission to prevent a new rebellion. When the crystal pillars lit up by the first time every night, at the sound of the trumpet of the threshold, the heart of the new covenant exhaled a pulse of visible light in all directions, as Enoch's inscriptions, silvered and alive, reminded each of presence that the future would be sustained by faith active and by the work together. The new order would be born not as imposition, but as an echo of restored free will restored. And when they raised their hands in a vow of mutual guard, human angels and Nephilims wrote a chapter of reconciliation that would mark the beginning of the reconstruction definitive of creation. In the first dawns after the judgment, Enoch remained in the heart of the new covenant, contemplating the transformed valley. Around you, the polyphony of instruments and voices celebrated the renewal, but in his innermost self echoed a deeper song. What is born from tempered hope by the memory of the darkness? Gathered with Miguel and Raphael, he heard the account of the steps taken, of the treaties, 2 community efforts, of the workshops built on the slopes. The archangel warrior, now in no hurry to wield the sword, declared, "The legacy that permeates these stones and this soil is not just a victory, it is the packed living of vigilance and compassion." Raphael, with a gentle smile, softly added, "And the mercy that we sow will return in glory, for the healing endures when shared." Enoch wrote the epilogue of his own mission in 12 chosen cedar tablets, recording the history of heroic acts and of the gestures humble. In each sentence, echoed the teaching that transcended ages. The strength without humility leads to the fall. Knowledge without compassion poisons the soul. Joint work refines the creation. Redemption depends on recognition of the error and service to others. The future rises in fidelity to these principles. Before leaving, for his journeys included other kingdoms beyond the veil, Enoch mounted incorruptible wooden staff, in which he embedded a crystal orb with the runes of the heart of the new alliance. "May this beacon feeds the faith of the just," he proclaimed, "and that its shine reminds everyone of the price paid to keep the balance balanced." In the following years, the generations were born knowing of the alliance forged in Kadesh. Nephilim became artisan guardians, angels, benevolent protectors, humans, heralds of fraternity. They made temples arise where the song mixed with the sound of the forge and the molded clay, celebrations of convergence between the divine and the earthly. At night, when the stars twinkled above the valleys and mountains, was seen in the firmament one inscription, fleeting, the symbol of the inverted scale, drawn by one mother-of-pearl luminescent. It was the reminder that the judgment, one once given, would proceed in the consciousness of each man, angel, or demigod, and that the balance would be maintained not by eternal decrees, but by the renewed choice of each soul. And in every breath of wind, it seemed to echo the voice of Enoch, the flame that illuminates the collective path. Protect, will share, and creation will live in perpetual alliance. And so the cycle ends, not with the tone of one dawn without clouds, but with the promise of a new day forged in responsibility shared and in the hope unquenchable.